I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Today's episode is with Dr. Cari Schaefer, who is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Dr. Cari stands at the forefront of menopausal wellness as the founder of Your Menopause Midwife, and with over 23 years of experience as a woman's healthcare provider, lecturer, teacher in health and nutrition, and as the author of the Amazon bestseller, The Food Solution, she's guided thousands in overcoming health barriers and achieving peak wellness. And Dr. Cari's mission extends beyond mere symptom management. She aims to rekindle a sense of empowerment in women during menopause, phase often undervalued in culture today. And so I'm very excited to welcome Cari to the show. Welcome, Cari.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So, Cari, just to kick it off, why do you think women are so disconnected from their health and well-being in culture today?
Well, I think that we are living in a way where we're out of balance in the demands that are placed upon us. And that is causing women to put their own self well-being in the background. We're trying to do it all. We're trying to be the super mom and the super working person and the super this and the super that. And it's just, it doesn't allow the time and the space for us to really focus on our longevity. We're paying attention to the now, and not to our long-term health and well-being.
Yeah. And so how do you kind of work with women and help them, discover this new connection to self?
Well, the first thing that I work with is we look for what I call outdated survival programs, which are imprints in the brain. Our brain is designed to record negative experiences so that in the future, when something similar happens, we know how to respond. A very simple example of that is if you go to touch a hot stove, you immediately pull your hand away because your brain has remembered that if you touch a hot stove, you're going to get burned. Well, it does the same thing in our emotional experiences as well. And what happens is this outdated survival programming can make us behave in ways that aren't necessarily in alignment with our highest good because we're trying to stay safe. But often these programs were written by a child's brain. And so they're not very sophisticated. And so you might, if you were a child and you were, say, self-soothed with, not self-soothed, but you were given candy, to calm you down or given a treat. Now we might go to eating sweets and sugar in order to kind of self-soothe, right? So we learn these coping mechanisms that don't really serve us anymore. And so the first place I start with people is identifying what their mechanisms are and then what we can do to start to change those programs to bring them into present day so that they're empowered and able to make choices that are in alignment with their highest vision for themselves.
Well, so Cari, give us an example, like one patient or one person that you've worked with who's had this program that's not serving them. How would you kind of find that program, or would they have to kind of do their own discovery? And then how do you move them out of it?
Yeah. So I was trained in a technique called neuro-emotional technique, which has been scientifically validated. It's quite amazing. And doing this technique, they've actually, recorded changes in the brain pre and post, receiving the sessions. But what neuro-emotional technique does is it helps us identify, um, patterns in our body, either in our physiology or in our psyche, that we're not in alignment with, um, in a way that is in our highest. And then we're able to identify where that imprint came from, and we're able to help the body reset that imprint and be able to move into the present day. So it's a really beautiful technique. NET is the short acronym for it. But anybody who's trying to make changes in their life but isn't able to, it's a beautiful technique for that. So, for instance, I have a woman that came in to see me, and she literally walked into my clinic carrying a bowl of frosting and a with her baby, and she said, "Cari, I am eating." This nonstop. I can't help myself. I am breastfeeding and I know it's not good for my child. And she was a rather tall woman, and she was quite beautiful. And, but, you could tell she was carrying more weight than was, her natural weight. And when we dove in and looked at this with, from this NET perspective, we found that when she was younger, she had been inappropriately touched by an adult. And thereby, when she was thin, she would get attention, and from, other out in the world, she'd walk around and people would give her attention, and that made her feel really unsafe. So even though intellectually she knew that eating the high sugar food wasn't good for her baby, she couldn't stop herself from doing it because she had a program that said, you're not safe if you get attention. And so she would put on the extra weight and carry the extra weight to keep herself safe. Now that's a really sort of drastic example. But, if you're a person who's, running to the refrigerator and self-soothing with food, I guarantee you that is an outdated survival program that is getting activated, and you're using food as a means of self-soothing.
Mm, fascinating. And so, okay, so let's dive into the conversation about menstruation. And let's also talk about menopause. First of all, what is a typical menstrual cycle length? And what is considered normal variation?
Yeah, so 28 to 32 days is normal variation. There are some women who have naturally longer or naturally shorter cycles, and it's been that way since they started their menstruation, and everything else is, normal. They don't have cramps and pain and all that kind of stuff. And so that would be considered normal in their case, but the average is 28 to 32 days, a little variation here and there. That's normal. What becomes unnormal is when we start getting the cycle variations, drastic shifts, when we start getting pain with our cycle, when we get cranky before our cycle, what we know as PMS. All of those are signs that there's an imbalance in the body that is affecting the hormones. And something to pay attention to. It is common, but it's not normal to have PMS. It's common, but not normal to have, severe menstrual cramps. So, those are all signs that something's out of balance.
And so, what about the causes for menstrual cramps? You said that it's common but not normal. Well, how can they be managed maybe naturally?
Yeah. So one of the things I find really common, particularly in young women that are experiencing menstrual cramps, is they're doing a lot of meal skipping or eating in ways that is robbing the body of nutrition. Essential fatty acids, things you get from fat in food, are really important for our menstrual health, and very often, for maybe weight reasons or other reasons, people are avoiding those, or they're eating the bad fats. They're eating fried food and what are called trans fats. And that actually turns on inflammation in the body. When you don't have enough of the healthy fats and too much of the unhealthy fats, then inflammation can get turned on, and that can cause, challenges around the menses and menstrual pain. If cramps are really severe, then I just had a young lady who was having severe menstrual cramps, and her mother took her to a gynecologist who sent her to a specialist, and they identified endometriosis. And they had scheduled her to have surgery. And for me, that's a last resort, because once you start the surgery cycle, then you get scar tissue, and that can cause problems. So I suggested to them that we did some testing and we looked for what was going on. And in her case, she had a digestive imbalance that was undiagnosed, and it was creating inflammation in her system. And we got her on a special diet and started her on some supplements to help balance that out. And within a month, her menstrual pain had decreased by 50%. So what causes menstrual pain can be varied, but the underlying cause is inflammation. And so we want to be looking for what's causing inflammation. You also can have a hormonal imbalance that's contributing too much estrogen in relationship to progesterone. And that can be caused by exposure to what are called xenoestrogens. And xenoestrogens are plastics they're not plastics, excuse me. Plastics have xenoestrogens, but xenoestrogens are chemicals that are in our skincare, our hair care, in our food sometimes, can be in our toothpaste, in plastic products, and that get into the body and they act like estrogens. And we end up with too much estrogen in our system in relationship to progesterone. And that's a really common cause of things like breast swelling and PMS and fibroids and the development of endometriosis. So getting that balanced out, super important. And a really easy way for a woman to start is just to look up xenoestrogens, spelled with an X, Xeno, estrogens, and start to clean them out of their life. I think every woman should do this, regardless of what stage of life they're in, because they also can predispose us towards developing cancers and things like that. So they're not good things to have on our body, but they play a big role in menstrual imbalances and things like menstrual pain and, like I said, endometriosis and fibroids. So everybody should look at what they're using on their body and clean things up.
Okay. And then what about in terms of what we eat? How does that impact?
Yeah. So again, skipping meals is a big one. Every time we skip a meal, that puts our body into a state of stress. And that's often a method that is used by women for weight management. But what it tends to do is it tends to put us into, we're not getting enough nutrition to really feed our systems for it to create the hormones, but also it can interrupt with hormone production. And high cortisol shuts down the immune system, and it also interrupts hormone production. And cortisol gets created every time our body doesn't have what it needs in order to get enough glucose, right? So when there's not enough glucose, the body puts out cortisol to get the body to break down glucose. And in the short run, it solves the problem. But in the long run, it causes a lot of health issues. So going back to making sure that we are not skipping meals, making sure that we're not overeating calories, but also not undereating calories. And then making sure that we're getting in those, as I said, those healthy fats, as well as the vitamins which are in vegetables. This is why we need to eat vegetables. I meet so many young women who have gone vegetarian, quote unquote, but they're not really vegetarian. They're carbitarians. They're not eating the vegetables. You got to eat the vegetables. That's where all the nutrients are. Most carbohydrates that have been, made into bread or pasta, they don't have any nutrition in them. And we're just robbing our body. Every time we eat foods that don't have nutrition, the body has to take the nutrients to just process the food from your own tissue. So by the time you process that food, you actually are nutrient less dense. You have less nutrients in your system. And the goal is to have, abundant, good nutrition in our system so the body can do everything it needs to do to keep itself healthy.
So, yeah, this is so great. I'm also curious about the sort of irregular menstrual cycles, like missed periods or heavy bleeding. I mean, how does that compare to the PMS, relieving PMS pain? Is it similar, or is there a difference?
It's very similar. Have you ever heard of PCOS, polycystic
Yes.
ovarian syndrome? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of women, and that can create all kinds of havoc with the cycles and weight gain and all kinds of things. And some women with PCOS are thin, but at the root of that is blood sugar imbalance, particularly too much glucose getting into the system. That's why when a woman has PCOS and you go to your regular Western doctor, they prescribe usually metformin, which is a pre-diabetes drug, right? So in the fertility years, it all comes back to these basic things. The body's got to have the nutrition it needs, right? It needs to have the water so it can detoxify itself properly. You need to get out the chemicals, and you need to make sure that you're keeping your stress level under control. You kind of handle those things, and that pretty much takes care of keeping the body well and balanced. And you got to get enough sleep. That's another one. When those things are out, then havoc can happen in the body, and you can end up with all kinds of different symptoms, particularly affecting the menstrual cycle in women. So anytime you're having symptoms, you want to kind of look at those basics. Am I getting, a good sleep? Am I eating nutritious food on regular intervals? Am I getting enough movement? Or one of the causes for no period is over movement. Am I over exercising? That's another big one for younger women. You want to look at those basics and then clean those things up, and then see how your body does. Give it a month and see how your body does. Like this young girl I told you about, all she did really was change her diet, and she was 50% improved, right? So getting those basics makes all the difference in getting that cycle regulated.
And Cari, you had mentioned in a previous conversation that there's this thing called seed cycling. What is that?
Yes. Oh, that's a great one. Thank you. So seed cycling so getting the essential fatty acids in can be hard for some women. So if you look up seed cycling, during the first few weeks of the month, you eat a couple of different seeds every day. And during the second 2 weeks of the month, you eat different seeds. And I always get confused which ones they are. So just Google it and look it up, or just, do a search. But and I have seen it do miracles in women's health, and particularly their menstrual health, just by making sure you're getting those essential fatty acids. And, you can throw them in your smoothie if you do that. You can throw them in your salads. You can do, however you want to eat them. But getting those in can make such a difference for your overall menstrual health.
So fascinating. Okay, so I have to check this out. I'm like, I have never heard of that before until you mentioned it. So,
Yeah.
and what about, okay, so let's talk about menopause, because this is really where you spend a lot of your time, really helping women celebrate this period of their life, which I think is so critical, right? Because I hear a lot of conversations about perimenopause and menopause and all the hot flashes and the sort of what's happening in a woman's internal system, and a lot of folks don't talk about this in mainstream culture. It's not a common conversation topic, and so let's dive in and talk about perimenopause and menopause, and perhaps you can just define them, because we have a pretty global audience, and not everyone has heard of perimenopause, for example. So perhaps you can just tell us, like, what are these things, and then what are the symptoms?
Absolutely. So firstly, I want to say there's a lot of powerful women out there that have recently gone through the change or are going through the change, and they're starting to talk about it. So hallelujah, because it was a canceled word. It was something you didn't talk about. Many women didn't even talk about it with their friends. And so I'm so glad this is starting to change. There's an aspect of the conversation that I think is super important. And so I want to make sure we talk about it today. But basically what happens is when you're a young child, your body shifts, and estradiol, which is a hormone, comes online, and that causes you to become fertile. And that's our transition into what we know as the fertility years. During the fertility years, every month, the body is preparing to get pregnant and have a baby. And if it doesn't, then you get your menstrual cycle. A woman's biological job, and a lot of times when we talk about this, it doesn't sound very PC, but it just is biologically a woman's job during this phase is to procreate. Then we start to transition from that biological job into a new biological job, and something really interesting happens. So during the fertility years, our hormones are made in our ovaries, and they're made at rather high levels because we need those high levels to prepare the womb for fertilization and then carrying a baby. When we transition out of the fertility years and into what are called the post-menopause years, we are in that transition period. We are in perimenopause. And the main thing that's happening is we are running out of eggs. And as we run out of eggs, our ovaries make less and less hormones. And as they make less and less hormones, the adrenals take up the job of either making the hormones themselves or making the precursors to the hormones. And so all of a sudden, your adrenals are hugely important. Why does that matter? Our adrenals are the hormones, are the glands in our body, the organs in our body that make stress hormones. So stress now becomes a major factor in how well we are making our hormones. And so one of the things that not a lot of people talk about, they talk about the symptoms, and we'll get into that have to do with, menopause and perimenopause. They talk about the symptoms being due to low hormones, but what they don't talk about is that there is a new level of normal hormones that is much lower than normal. But if you are making those levels, then you should be symptomatic, asymptomatic. My mother went through menopause asymptomatic. My grandmother went through menopause asymptomatic. I did not. I went through that menopausal transition and I had symptoms, partially because a doctor recommended I go to a drastic detox, which stressed my body out and hindered my hormone production. And so when women understand this, it really empowers them to look around their life and say, okay, what can I do to decrease my stress level? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just taking it in.
Yeah.
Okay. So, these years, and what are like kind of the common age, ranges of perimenopause versus menopause?
So if you want to kind of know where you're at, you can look at your, if you're able to, your family history. You can look at what your mom did and your grandma, and there is kind of a genetic component to that, but there's also a factor of our health. So if we take care of ourselves in the fertility years and do the things that I said, when we transition into the menopausal years, it's going to be much smoother. But if we are really stressed out, if we are doing things like a lot of women right now are doing egg retrieval in case they want to have children later, that will put you into menopause earlier because you'll run out of eggs earlier. If we are, taking hormones, the pill and things like that, that also can affect us going in. The depot shot, that sends us in early. But in average, the average age is in our 40s. Usually mid to later 40s, we start this perimenopausal transition. When I see women come in and they're in their early 40s and their family members went in later, we usually can rebalance their body out. I remember when I was 45, I went to 40, I went to my gynecologist and I told her the symptoms I was having. And she blamed every symptom on perimenopause except one. But 5 years later, I didn't have any of those symptoms. So whatever was going on in my body, I had balanced out, right? So because I did go into a perimenopausal imbalance later, as I said, when I was advised to go to this drastic detox center, and it stressed my system out. That's what actually got me started on talking about it, because I went to find out what the heck was going on and realized that nobody really understood it in a way that was as helpful as I would have liked it to have been. So perimenopause, so in that transition, if our body has a lot of stress, and there's two kinds of stress that I like to talk about. I call one external stress. It's the things that are happening outside of us and how we're relating to them, right? So, jobs, bosses, family, finances, all that kind of stuff. And then there's something called I call internal stress or hidden stress. And internal stress is literally things inside your body systems in your body that are under stress for one reason or another. Digestive imbalances are a really big one. Not enough nutrition can be a big one. Buildup of toxins can be a big one. These things cause stress in the body that interfere with proper hormone production. And so when a woman is having a bumpy time, and that bumpy time is called menopausal syndrome, medically. And when they're having a bumpy time, the first thing we have to do is go, okay, where are the areas of stress and how can we decrease those areas of stress so that the adrenals can do their job of producing the hormones, right? Now, if somebody's system is super stressed out, they say they've got something called SIBO, which takes a while to get rid of, and they've got a lot of life stress and their body's just really stressed out, then that's when we might consider, some hormone replacement just to get their system out from underwater, because low hormones are a stress to the body and particularly to the brain, and it increases inflammation and all kinds of stuff. But for the most part, with most women, we can get them balanced back out without the need for hormone replacement if their system isn't too imbalanced.
So I just want to double click on a couple things here. So, when it comes to moving into menopause, I want to understand a little bit more about how you consider this to be a little bit of a celebration, right? Like if all these,
we
you
haven't
talk
talked about that.
because like it's so interesting because the way that this conversation is oftentimes spoken about is that there's so many changes happening, right, in our inner world and our external world, and also how we relate to the world. I'm sure so much is happening, and I want to really double click on this idea of it being a celebration. Like
Yeah.
how does that work in this journey?
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm so glad I got so into the nitty gritty of it that I wasn't touching on that point. So I always say this is happening for us, not to us. And women often make a face because particularly if they're not feeling well, like how is this happening for my benefit? During their fertility years, if women think about it, when their cycle comes on, they might feel depleted. They just might not have as much energy. It takes a lot of resources to prepare for a baby every month. And so when we're transitioning out of our biological role as the person who brings forth life, and we're shifting into our new biological role. So this is a shift. We are literally taking on a new biological role. Men don't make this shift like women do. Hence the reason they don't have a perimenopause. Their hormones might shift, but they don't take on a new biological role in the same way that we do. And the new biological role a woman is biologically designed to do is to become the person who distills. Now, men do this as well, but I'm not saying they don't, but we become the wisdom keepers. We become, if you think tribally, we were the midwives, we were the healers, sometimes the tribal leaders, right? And so our job now is to distill the wisdom that we have gained from our life and to teach it to the younger generations. And in doing that, if you think about the skills that are needed to, attract a mate, procreate, and keep our offspring alive, the biological function of the fertility years, they're very different than the skills needed to distill wisdom and convey it, right? And so a lot of things change in our psyche and our personality during this time. And I say it's happening for a woman because we stop losing all those resources every month in service of our next new role. And one of the things that starts to happen is we stop focusing so much on the outside world, unless we have outdated survival programming that's really dictating that, that we're doing that. From a biological perspective, we stop focusing so much on the external world and we start becoming a little more self-focused and internal. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. It's just we start to come into the equation. Anyone who's a mama knows that most of your focus is out on everybody else. Well, that energy starts to come back to us. And we start to be able to go in and say, who am I and what do I want to offer to this world? What's my legacy for my life? Well, how do I want to support in a bigger way? And this is where we see women starting to, maybe they start a foundation, maybe they start to do charity, maybe they just really start to focus on their grandchildren in a new way. It's a really beautiful time in a woman's life because we get so many of our resources back for us to be able to really focus on how do we want to serve in this next phase of our life. That's why I say it's happening for us. It's actually really such a lovely time. There's been many women I've worked with who were really like, I don't want this. I don't want to stop bleeding. I don't want it. I don't like it. I don't like it. And I keep saying, I promise, just hold on. Just hold on. I like being a mama. I want to focus on my kids. And then, the kids grow up, they get further along in the process and they call me up and they're like, my kid's heading to college tomorrow. I'm so excited. I get to do this and I want to do that. And I'm thinking of doing this and I'm reevaluating my career. And so it does happen. And I really believe it's actually part of the divine plan, the shift, because I see it in too many women. It's just too many women go through this and I watch them and it's really beautiful. It's such a beautiful time of a woman's life. If we can get the body balanced out, because when the body's not balanced out, then it's kind of miserable.
Yes,
so we got to get the body balanced out, right? Which is totally possible to do, by the way. It's totally possible to get the body balanced out.
I love that. I mean, that's so reassuring and amazing to hear. And I love this like reclamation, of your time and energy back, because it is a lot. I mean, to go through the seasonality and to bleed and to go through any kind of release, right? It's a lot. It's a lot in the system. So I want to talk about, actually, before we move on to the Menopause Midwife and how you created the company and what it's about, I want to talk a little bit about sex drive and menopause. Like, how does menopause or perimenopause impact sex drive, if at all? And what is the future of a woman's sex drive, when it comes to the changes in these hormones?
Yeah, that's so great, Yasmin. The first thing I want to add in here, before we talk about sex drive, because it plays a role, is that one of the things that I notice happens during the menopausal years, is that we get our sacred no back. And what does that mean? It means that, very often in the fertility years, we're pleasing others. We're taking care of others. Again, that focus is out, and we might say yes to things that we don't, without even thinking about how we really feel about it. And during the menopausal years, that starts to shift and we start to evaluate, what do I want? And like I said, what do I want? And who do I want to be? And how do I want to offer? I remember one of my dear, dear girlfriends, I had told her about this. And one day she calls me up and she's like, oh my gosh, Cari, you're so right. And I said, what? She goes, I just said no to my husband and I would have never said no to him about that, the thing he was asking before. And she was nervous and excited simultaneously, right? And so in getting our sacred no back, if we are in an intimate relationship that isn't serving us, we might start saying no. What starts to happen is that during the fertility years, we have a biological drive to procreate, whether we're choosing to or not. I didn't procreate, but I certainly remember, around ovulation, boy, I would be like, looking around, but when we change into the menopausal years, we don't have that biological drive in the same way anymore. And that can be really disorienting for some women. So one of the things that's really important for us during this phase is that we start to, again, turn back to ourselves and we start to learn what really turns us on. So one of the things that really helped me was this woman, she goes by Miss Jaya, and she had this little quiz that my husband and I took. And it helped me identify sort of what were the things that I became aroused by. And I got to relearn who I was as a sexual being without that fire, right? So it can be different. Now, that said, there are some women that their libido goes way up because it was being affected by they didn't want children. They didn't want any more children. And so their libido goes up when they no longer have to worry about that. So it's not the same for everybody, but there is this transition where we have to get used to the fact that we don't have the same motivating factor anymore. We don't have the same biology saying, oh, procreate. But what seems to be more important is connection. And so really diving in to connection can really help women find that verve again and that thing that turns them on. And this was a transition that my husband and I went through. We certainly went through a period where we were like, whoa, what's going on? And a lot of times hormones are blamed. And, sometimes that might be the case in some cases. And sometimes it's just that we don't either know ourselves well enough or we don't know ourselves in this new hormonal way, and we have to relearn. So there definitely can be some changes for some women. And again, there's no given which way it's going to go, whether you're going to be somebody who gets more of a libido or whether your libido is going to go down.
Fascinating. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
These are conversations I think a lot of people have, but there's just so much confusion around this topic. So,
Yeah.
I love getting your feedback.
Well, and the confusion also for the partners. It's the men need to know this, right? Because they're like, what happened? Where did we have dear friends that have called me up and said, what's going on? She's just not interested anymore. Right. And explaining to them that, she's in this transition and if she's really stressed, that could be getting in the way but that, it isn't because she doesn't love you anymore. Right. And then going into open conversation like my husband and I did about it and into exploration together, to find the new way of being together. Super important.
So let's talk a little bit about the Menopause Midwife. Why did you create this? And, what was kind of the genesis story that brought you to this work?
Yeah. So I, as I said, I was sent to this detox center by one of my, health practitioners at age 47 after having a long history of health challenges. So my system was just actually a few years out of actually finally feeling good. So it wasn't super strong in this new health. And the detox at age 47 really wreaked havoc. And I left and I developed phobias I'd never had and anxiety I'd never had and all kinds of things on the body. And when I was trying to figure out what was going on, I had a client come in and she said, Cari, I've been having these phobias and I'm fear of getting in the back of a car and I can't get into an elevator. And I was like, interesting, because this is exactly what I was experiencing. She said, and I Googled it and it said it could be perimenopause. And I was like, what? I'd never heard that before. I'd heard hot flashes and cranky and dryness and, but I'd never heard anything like this. So I said, whoa, I'm a doctor of holistic medicine. I've been studying hormones for many years, right? So if I don't know about it, what's going on? So I started diving in and I started studying everything I could. And I went to this one seminar and this woman stood up in front of the room and she said that from a biological and anthropological perspective, women were done post-fertility years. And I was like, what? What? Not what? that just so didn't resonate as true. And then at the and she said, so the most loving thing we can do is keep them bleeding until their 80s. And I was just like, oh no, wait, no. And so at the end, I raised my hand. She didn't say till their 80s. She said just keep them bleeding. And at the end, I raised my hand and said, well, how long do you keep them bleeding? And she was probably in her mid 60s. And she said, well, my mom's still bleeding. And I was like, what? And so I was like, you know what? This conversation has got to change. This is a problem. We're pathologizing this thing that is divinely created. Like the nature didn't get it wrong, people. It's not that we know better than nature. And yes, it's bumpy for people, but that's because we're living out of balance as we started this conversation with, right? Women aren't taking care of themselves. They're not paying attention. We're living in a constant state of survival. And that's really draining our system. I call it living in the red, right? We're spending our resources throughout our whole life. So by the time we get to menopause, we're empty. But then it got worse. So 6 months later, I got a email from the doctor who had put on the workshop with this woman. And he said, hey, Cari, Dr. So-and-so is coming back. Are you going to show up for the workshop? And I was like, I wrote back and I said, quite honestly, I found her platform, offensive. Like, women are done post-menopause. And he wrote back and he said, well, I can understand that. Some species die after giving birth. And I was like, what? What? Like, this is another holistic healthcare provider that women are going to go see when they're suffering. And the person's going to be sitting there thinking, you're lucky you're not dead. I mean, it's so absurd. The thought I had back, I actually can't remember whether I wrote back or not. I did write back and say, hey, I don't see it this way. But I wanted to say, black widow spiders eat their mates. So what does that have to do with human beings? Like, really? And so that's what started. It was a complete passion project. I had to do something about this conversation. And it's still, there's more work to do. I was recently at a conference that was completely dedicated to the menopausal journey, and lots of experts on the stage, and all of them were talking about hormones, and nobody was really having this conversation about the role that stress plays in our hormones. And I spoke to a couple of women afterwards, and they're like, well, I don't want to take hormones. So what do I do? And I was like, well, you got to see why your body's under stress. And so and then I watched the lights go on in her eyes, because she now felt empowered, like she had a direction, she knew what to do. So a lot of women feel helpless and hopeless during this time. You can feel like your brain has gone rogue. You can feel like you're getting Alzheimer's. You can feel like your body is, not, it's falling apart. And none of that is true, but it is a sign that something's out of balance, and the driving force behind that imbalance is this underlying stress. So I always say to women, it's not the low hormones that are the problem. It's the thing that's causing the low hormones. So let's look deeper. If we only address the hormones, we leave your body in a state of stress, which is going to affect your health and well-being in the long run. Right? And so I really encourage women to, dive in and look deeper. So the Menopause Midwife was designed to get out there and share this information. I also have a course that I created for women so that they can self-directed learn all this information, dive in, learn about it, and also know what lab tests to run on themselves, know how to identify and figure out where the imbalance is in their body, so that they're empowered. Because what I find a lot of women doing is running to this doctor, and nobody's putting the pieces together. And all of it goes together. It's not, you're a whole system, and all of it plays a role in your body being able to produce healthy hormone levels during this phase. Mm. So that's why I created it. It was just something I had to do. I had no choice. I was like, oh my gosh, no.
Sometimes, sometimes like the path is just so clear and easy, based on our own personal experience. So I'm so happy that you're doing this work, because it feels just so necessary right now. And I'm also curious, have you seen fluctuations in the last 10 years or so, like working with different women? Has the pandemic, did that make an impact on how people's kind of perimenopause or menopause, or even just their menstrual cycles? Were they affected by that?
I had an interesting conversation. In my practice, I wasn't seeing a lot of it, but I was, the maternal death rate has gone up by 40% last year in the United States, and only in the United States. And so there's this big inquiry around why that is. Why are women dying at such a higher rate than they were before? And the common thing that is being said is, it has to do with access to care. But if that were the case, I would think that during the pandemic, when we were really in it, would have been when that was shown up, because women literally did have lack of access to care. They weren't getting the prenatal care during that time. It didn't spike then. It spiked after. And the only thing I can say is that I was in a jacuzzi, and I was talking to this nurse. And she was a nurse for fertility. And she said, I asked her about this maternal death rate. And she said, well, Cari, I want to say that I'm not getting into a vaccine conversation. I'm just telling you what she said. She says, I want to say that I want you to know I'm pro-vaccine. I was the first person to get it in my unit and all of that. And she said, but we did see an uptick post-vaccination in irregular menstrual cycles. And she said, we saw an uptake in menstrual bleeding and all of that. So that was coming from, a reputable source who's in the ground doing it. I haven't seen a ton of that in my practice. But she sees a lot more women that are dealing with fertility than I do. So I found that interesting. And the pandemic itself, I can't say for a lot of people, the pandemic decreased stress. A lot of women, they weren't running around doing 1,000 things anymore. And so the overall stress on their body went down. So I can't say that I've seen an uptick because of that. We're probably seeing an uptick more now that people are back out and, running around again like crazy.
What about,
Yeah.
also, I'm sure people who've had COVID, forget the vaccine conversation, people who also had COVID, that was a big, wrecking ball to one's internal system. And I'm sure that probably did not contribute to.
Well, what's interesting, Yasmin, is in my experience, and that's all I can speak to, anybody who's come in to see me who had long-term COVID, we were able pretty quickly within, not that long of a time to get their body balanced out. A lot of times what I saw was, quite truthfully, people were just taking so much stuff, and that all that stuff was overloading the system, because COVID, it does, stress the body out. And then you take too many supplements or too many medications, and the body just gets more stressed out. And at the time, by the time they see me, the COVID is down. They're still not feeling well. We get them on less stuff and just on the exact right stuff. And then their body starts to even out. So I haven't, again, seen that long term. The most I've seen is somebody who lost their sense of taste and has not gotten it back yet. That is one symptom that I have seen not recover yet. But for the most part, we can get their bodies balanced back out. And we got to not over-treat ourselves.
Right.
Because there's so much information on the internet,
Right. Absolutely. So, Cari, what about, in terms of looking back on your journey, what has surprised you the most, when you think about menopause and the work that you're doing?
The piece of data about the role of the adrenals was the most surprising to me. I didn't know that. I was taught that we become, in Chinese medicine, yin deficient, and we have to do things to support yin. And that's often the go-to strategy for, if you look at like herbal products that, focus on it, or, whatever, that's what they're all doing. They're all supporting the buildup of the hormones, which in some cases is very helpful. But if a woman is not finding that they're getting better doing that, or maybe they even feel worse, it's really important to understand that there's a stressor in your system. There's something in your body, particularly if the what are called adaptogenic herbs are making you feel worse. And I can almost guarantee you that you've got an immune challenge in your system that you're not aware of. And because those adaptogenic herbs actually strengthen an immune challenge, and, can make brain fog worse and all of that if you have one. And so really understanding that it's not just the hormones that are a problem. We've got to look at the body. We've got to look at why the body's under stress, and then what is the cause of it, and then eliminate that stress, and you will help your body balance out and find this new level of amazing that can happen in the menopausal years. I think that was the big one for me, because nobody was talking about it. I wasn't educated about it. And when I read it, when I was like, what? The adrenals now take over the creation of our hormones. Oh my, all the pieces dropped into place for me because of the way I practice which has always been looking for stress on the body. It was just like chink. Oh my goodness. And it's part of why I feel like it's a little bit been, assigned to me to be the person who's got to advertise this out in the world, because of my history, that when I learned this piece of data, it made so much sense. And now this is what I do with women. I have a woman coming in with terrible hot flashes, and we look for why. By the way, hot flashes, very often an immune challenge. It's not the hormones. A little bit of hormone therapy might help, but there's generally an immune challenge underneath. And I had this woman, she was overweight. She had paid tons of people, lots of money. She was sweating all night. She wasn't sleeping. And I identified an immune challenge that actually wasn't even hidden. It was showing up on her urinalysis. We put her on some homeopathics for it. And within 3 days, she had stopped sweating and she was sleeping through the night. And like miracles. But if we had just tried to give her stuff for her hormones, and then eventually, and then she started losing the weight, which she couldn't lose either because that stressed out bodies don't lose weight well. But if you had just focused on her hormones, you would have never gotten her better. And she would have her urinary system would have continued to have this immune challenge that was draining it and stressing her body out.
So, oh my gosh. So I feel like I want to actually dive a little bit into a couple more questions before we wrap up.
Okay.
Because I want to, since you're a doctor of acupuncture medicine, like you really understand the energetic systems of the body, right? And so
Yes.
how do our organs play into the conversation around menopause? Like specifically, the major organs like the liver, the gallbladder, the spleen. How can you work with your organs or eat the right food to help you kind of move through this phase?
Right. So again, the most important organ during this phase is those adrenals, but those adrenals get stressed out by any other organ system that's stressed out. So if you are a person who gets gas and bloating, or you have a distended belly, or you feel like your belly is fat for no reason, or if you don't have a bowel movement at least one a day, or if you have many a day and they're loose, those are all signs that you've got something called dysbiosis. And very often at the root of that is, a bowel infection. And so you just want to start by balancing that out. Our liver's job is to clear out all the toxins. And so when we're still cycling, our liver plays a really huge, important role because our liver, our estrogen goes up and peaks, and then we ovulate, and then it goes down. But it only goes down if the liver cycles it out. And if the liver's gunked up and doing too many things and it's not able to clean out that estrogen, that also contributes to estrogen dominance. So things that take care of our liver is, getting the chemicals out of our diet, and I have a whole book on that called The Food Solution. It's all about getting the chemicals out of your diet, getting the chemicals out of our skin, our hair care products, our makeup, making sure we're getting the nutrition that the body needs, not drinking too much, not partying too hard. All of that puts more stress on the liver. Getting, like I said, some exercise, but not too much exercise. Many of us are either too sedentary or we're over exercising. We got to find that balance for the body, making sure every day we're moving our body at least once, twice a day. And those really help the liver. Emotions really stress the liver out. So if we are suppressing our anger, holding back, not finding ways to release emotions, I'm not talking about yelling at other people, but, ways to acknowledge that we're having emotions and to just let them go, shake them out. That can really stress the liver out as well. So taking care of our liver health, super important. Digestive imbalances create toxins, those toxins the liver has to deal with. So again, going back to the digestion, making sure we're getting enough water, because water is how the body, but not too much, right? We don't need it, 2 gallons of water a day. I've read articles recently that say we don't need as much water as we think, And the reason they wrote the article was based on marathon runners getting water toxicity from drinking too much water. But no, that's not what we're talking about here. But too much water isn't good for us, but too little isn't either. So it depends a bit on your size, but 6, 8 glasses a day. It's a nice amount. Making sure it's good quality water is super important. And then so we've got our liver health, all those things help the liver. We've got our bowel health, and then our, making sure our brain is healthy. And what are the things that support the brain? It's got to have regular glucose or ketones if you're eating a ketogenic diet, but it's got to have regular food to make energy. If not, the brain gets very stressed out. We've got to keep the toxins down because they can get into the brain. If we're having brain fog, then we either have most likely a food sensitivity. So doing what's called a 21-day elimination diet, that's in my book. or we're having an immune challenge in the brain. I just had a client today who was having really foggy brain, used to having a really high working brain. And they've done every test you can imagine, but nobody looked at the immune challenges. And sure enough, he's got a chronic sinus infection. And I guarantee you, we clean that up and his brain function is going to improve. He's got some other things too, but that was, so that's a really important thing is brain health. But again, how do we take care of all those things? It goes back to those basic lifestyle choices. I've been practicing medicine for 24 years in January. And I tell you, it goes back to healthy lifestyle choices. I've done these labs and this specialty thing and that thing, and it all comes back to taking care of ourselves. And then you can use the specialty stuff to clean up whatever has gotten gunked up from years of not taking care of ourselves. It doesn't sound very sexy. Everyone's always looking for the latest, greatest pill or whatever. But in telling you, it's not going to do it. We got to take care of ourselves. The pills help us balance out once we're once we're in an imbalance, but they will never replace taking care of ourselves.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I've learned so much from you, Cari. This has been so fabulous. I think I have to listen to this again, to be honest, just to really grasp all the information here. But thank you for the work that you're doing. And where can people find you? What's your kind of main call to action? And then where can people find you?
So if you go, my website's being rebuilt, but if you go there right now, to cariforhealth.com. You can get my contact information. You can reach out to us. We can get you information about the course. You can go to Amazon. You can buy my book. Although there's somebody else who wrote a book with the same title, so you have to put in my name. I just recently realized when I Googled myself, I was like, wait, that's the same title. So make sure you put in my name, Dr. Cari Schaefer. Otherwise, you'll get the food solution, which it has nothing to do with me. So those are some basic first steps. I have a Facebook group called Your Menopause Midwife. They're welcome to join there. That is always up to date with what we have going on. And in the new year, we're going to be doing a 21-day diet detox together, and then some of that emotional work in a little 5-week cost-effective course, just because I really want to support people through this, the emotional process. And so there's a lot going on. So yeah, if they get on my mailing list, then they'll know what where is happening. Once or a couple times a year, I do some master classes that are free. So they'll learn about that. So that's probably the best way to learn about what we're up to.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, amazing. Well, Cari, thank you so much again for your time. Really, really appreciate the conversation and your wisdom after all these years. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really my pleasure to be here and share this information with all your listeners.
Oh, well, for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about perimenopause, menopause, and the menstrual cycle with Dr. Cari Schaefer. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and consciousness. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed, and you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.